All right. Everyone can hear me fine? Hands up. Way up there? Okay, I just need to turn on my timer so I make sure I don't bore you to death for too long. So first of all, that was a fantastic introduction, so thank you for that. And it is true, I hate ticks. Do I share this feeling? Yeah, coming to Indiana, I was a bit shocked by the number of ticks in this country. They're not as prevalent in the UK or in Canada. So kudos to all of you for living with them. It's challenging. So today I have the pleasure of talking to you about a tick-borne illness, an allergy instead of an actual parasite or bacteria that's transmitted by the tick. And I am able to co-do this, co-present with our new graduate student, Jalynn Murry. So to add more of a personal touch, what I'm going to be talking to you about today. So how many of you have actually heard of this allergy? Hands up. Oh, enough of you. How many of you might have it? You don't know. It could be. You could. Well, maybe by the end of these presentations tonight from Jalynn and I, we will be able to answer that question for you. So first of all, I want to start just with an audience survey by hands up only. So first of all, how many spend time outdoors between February in this country and November? I know, it's just appalling. Where are your beautiful winters? You need more snow. Secondly, how many people enjoy barbecue? Excellent. Third, how many own a pet? This isn't looking too well for all of you. Lots of hands going up. How many of you have a food allergy? Any food allergy? A few. Who has had an encounter with a tick in the last year? Oh, you poor people. You have my condolences for that. Were you able to pull it off before it started feeding on you? Hands up. Good. All the rest of you became the meal, yes? What if it wasn't you? Oh, that still counts. That still counts. Lastly, I already asked you this question. So the reason I've asked you these questions is because all of these things you've answered yes to put you at risk of getting this allergy or getting a tick-borne disease. Sobering. Things that we love to do put us at risk. So I'm just going to quickly give you an overview tonight of some of the symptoms and risk factors, what a Lone Star tick looks like. It does not look like this. This is my rendition as if it were made out of a steak. What is the risk for you here in Indiana? What are some misconceptions that I think you might need to arm yourself with if you do encounter people that might not believe that such a thing to red meat allergy exists? But this all starts out, it's a really interesting story. This is Dr. Platts Mills is an allergist that was researching this odd anaphylactic type delayed reaction to a meal that was triggered by a chemotherapy drug, which is an antibody drug, many, many years ago. And he noticed that there was a cluster of patients that most likely developed an allergy to this. He started investigating this further to figure out why is just this subset of patients reacting, even though many were on this cancer therapy trial. And he discovered that it was only certain parts of the United States, certain states that were having patients react. This led him into quite many years trying to figure out what was the trigger for this disease. Or this reaction, I should say. And what was really striking, and this is a quote of his, unlike most severe allergic reactions, the patients didn't experience any symptoms. Not even a few hives or a little itching. They went straight into an anaphylactic shock in this case, until many hours after they ate. Now that is the key for alpha-gal syndrome. Even more baffling was that when the patients were skin tested for an allergy to beef, the test came up negative. Still, these people insisted they were reacting to meat. So as a good doctor should, they listen to their patients. What is interesting is this next quote. They were all being dissed like crazy, so the patients themselves weren't being believed. We even have patients who were dissed in my clinic, said the allergist. But they were really clear about it. We tried very hard to get them to admit that it really happened in 1 hour. I even tried to push one guy's wife to tell me, and she said, I timed him. It takes 4 hours. So this is after eating a meal. So when someone comes to you very committed to this type of answer, he listened and realized that they were up against something that they hadn't investigated before as an allergist. So what might be interesting here is that he one time visited the UK, and while he was there, he had an allergic reaction to lamb chops. So one day in August in 2007, he was hiking and his feet were covered in Lone Star ticks. He didn't think anything of it because he lived in Virginia and there was always ticks everywhere because of the booming deer population. If you have a lot of deer, you have a lot of mice, you will have a lot of ticks. 3 months after this exposure to these ticks, he went and consumed his his lamb chops, and several hours later, he woke up itching and coated in head to toe in hives. And at this point, because he experienced this himself, and especially the delayed reaction, he concluded it probably had to do with the bite of a tick, sensitizing him to meat. So this is a picture of a Lone Star tick. If I could, I would darken the lights, but we can't. So this is the female Lone Star tick, and she has that nice white spot on her back that they say looks like a star. And it is the cause for the localized reactions of these patients that were on the cancer therapy that I originally mentioned that triggered them because they were getting an injection of something that was a meat product. It was a humanized antibody, so that you were getting mice. So what I said was interesting is if you think that you have an allergy to anything, you can often get a skin test. But in the case of having a meat allergy, you don't react to either the skin prick, and sometimes if you do, intradermal, but not always. So it's a very unusual allergy to have to diagnose. So this just shows you quickly, I have to throw in some graphs, I'm a scientist. So we have here on this axis, sorry, I'm going to move. So if you're looking at this axis here, we're looking at the concentration of an antibody called IgE in your system. And it's usually quite low. It's the antibody that reacts when you have an allergy. And in all of these cases, if we're looking at, this is over time, taking serum samples from patients, each one is a different patient, that you see 2 lines. You see one that is the normal IgE amount, which is your blue line, and then the IgE that is particularly specific to the sugar, alpha-gal, that is found in meat and meat byproducts. And so you can see that every time there is oops, sorry, I should have put the code here. Every time there is a tick bite, which is denoted by the arrow, you should see an increase in your response, your allergy response. And then if you have an onset of hives, it's usually the case, like right here where there's a peak on the top, patient 1 or patient 3, that it means that you've been sensitized to that sugar and your body is now reacting. What is interesting is that if you look at patient 2 with that beautiful high high level of IgE antibodies, there is no reaction, no hives, and the allergy to the sugar specifically is much lower. So what this tells you is you can get tick bites and not react at all. So not everybody who does get a tick bite will react. You might be fine for many years, and then suddenly you breach some sort of barrier. Nobody knows what that is, and then you become sensitized. So I've just kind of summarized that. When you go to find out whether you have alpha-gal syndrome or not, you're going to take a simple blood test, and always the blood test will look at your IgE levels and compare it to your alpha-gal IgE levels. And this is the value that you normally want to look for, is if there's this 2% difference between these 2 levels, you are likely to be sensitized against that sugar, alpha-gal. So what is alpha-gal syndrome? It is when a carrier of this sugar, and usually it's a tick, bites you, then some time happens, and then you end up eating meat that has that sugar, and your immune system goes a little bit off the rails. It's not necessarily that sugar is bad for you, it's just the way that your body reacts to it is what gives you the allergy. And then, of course, it has to be delayed. It's very unusual for you to get a reaction immediately after you eat your hamburger. So there are several ways that a person can experience this allergy. Headaches can be the first one. You can have anxiety waking up in the middle of the night and you don't know why, and it's the release of the histamine that causes you to be so anxious. You could be congested, diarrhea, faintness, hives, nausea, drop in blood pressure, which makes you feel anxious as well, swelling, which is what you don't want, and then in severe cases, anaphylactic shock. I want to say if you feel any of these things, and it's after you eat a meal of meat or alpha-gal containing foods, you should check out this amazing resource. It is put together by a bunch of scientists with evidence-based research. It's called alphagalinformation.org. Fantastic resource for anybody. So what is interesting, out of all of this list of symptoms, the most common one that people report is severe stomach pain. And because of that, alpha-gal often gets thought of as IBS, confused with IBS. So it could take a long time to get a proper diagnosis of this illness. So it is a syndrome, but not necessarily to red meat only. Even though it's been branded as the red meat allergy, I'm going to just show you a few things why it is not just red meat. It is the 10th most common allergy in the United States now. This isn't unusual. I wouldn't say it isn't unusual. It's not unusual to rank it this high. It might even be higher because of a lack of reporting and a lack of people that know that they have it. There are food sources, and there's just a list of some of them. Your big ones are your mammalian meat, or if you eat rabbit or even whale, you can still react to this because that sugar is in the meat of these animals. And carrageenan, does anybody know what carrageenan is? It's a seaweed, and that seaweed is also decorated with this sugar. So if you have seaweed, which is used as a thickening agent in many, many products you eat, you could still have a reaction. The unusual thing to have a reaction to is dairy, unless you're super sensitized. And in worst case scenarios, you will not even be able to go into a restaurant where you have a barbecue happening because you will be inhaling this sugar. What is unusual are that medications people don't think about as a meat product, but heparin is a meat product. It's made from the intestines of pigs. So if you go in for blood thinners into the hospital and you have alpha-gal syndrome, you could react very strongly. So there are medications, therapies, and even cosmetics. So those of you that use lanolin-based products, if you have alpha-gal syndrome, or you go on with this fancy trend of wearing or using beef tallow in your healthcare products or in your lipstick, you could have quite a profound reaction. So the most dangerous foods to eat if you have alpha-gal is anything that's high fat. And the big one is pork sausage. So usually that's the indicator of when people know that they might be having a reaction. They have bacon or a nice juicy bratwurst and they will have a reaction. So like I said, here in the United States, the main tick spreading this disease is the Lone Star tick. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other ticks that can spread it. So this is a map globally, and you can see there's several other species of ticks that if you get a bite, you can be sensitized to this sugar and end up with alpha-gal syndrome. So again, this is the Lone Star tick. I just want to tell you a little bit more about the tick because that's my specialty as a vector biologist. So like I said, this is a female. She has a big spot on her back, and this activity that you're seeing is called the questing behavior. And the ticks, all tick species do this. They walk up to the top of a piece of grass or usually something about this high or lower, and they stand like this. And they're waiting for you to go by so that they can snag you, and then they just crawl onto your skin, your trousers, and find a nice dark place to bite you. Dark, warm, protected. So they are very tiny when they are babies. So that is the US dime. And that is how big a larva is when it hatches from its egg. There is a 2-year cycle of this tick. And the thing that I want to flag is that each female lays 2,500 to 3,000 eggs. So they can take over a geographical range very quickly if they establish. You only need one female to deliver that amount of eggs, which is horrifying. They also overwinter quite well. Especially in a place here where your winters are not very strong, they can find a place to survive the winter. Should we be worried about ticks in Indiana? Yeah. Well, Lone Star, traditionally, we're not here because we're too far north. But if you look at this is the historic range in yellow. And look at that huge band of darker yellow. And we are definitely part of that range. Things are moving north. These things are moving north. With regards to how far north, what's dear to me, of course, is what's happening also in Canada. And so far, greater than 100 ticks have been reported there. Disturbing. I thought I was safe. I thought my family was safe. In here particularly, this is a map showing how the frequency of Lone Star, and you can go to this amazing website and just see where all the cases are happening that have been reported. You are at risk. So I was talking with the person who was recording surveillance for all of the vector-borne diseases here in St. Joe County, and they found last year a Lone Star tick in one of the parks. Now, they only ever found one Lone Star tick. It was a female. She had her spot. They don't know if she laid eggs, but there was definitely an incidence, and many of them fly in on the bodies of course, birds. And so they can drop off from the birds and establish. So it's a worry that one has been spotted here. That means that we're not very far away until there is a colony. So just humor me, has any of you ever found a tick with a white spot on its back? Say no? That's good. The males are also quite different. They have white diffuse patterns on their back, not just that big white spot. So the next thing is, now that I've scared you about ticks and allergies, what I want to leave you with is a thought of hope that we can protect ourselves against these tick bites. And there are several repellents that you can use and permethrin-treated clothing. But the big thing to work against ticks is something called 20% picaridin. So when you are shopping, DEET also works, but a lot of people don't like DEET. So look for something that has picaridin, and it is a repellent that is highly efficient against mosquitoes, ticks, black flies, horse flies. They just do not like it. And it has the wonderful advantage over DEET that it doesn't melt plastic. So you can put it around your phone. It won't dissolve your phone or your watch or whatever it might be. So I was going to say, in the other thing, so other than using a repellent or permethrin-treated clothing, one thing people don't realize when they use permethrin-treated clothing is it's not a repellent. It kills the insects that encounter you. So you could be hiking along and your legs are covered with ticks. Don't worry, they are dead. They're barely clinging on with their lives because the insecticide works so quickly. The permethrin is an insecticide and also a tickicide, or a acaricide, we say. So that's a good sign when they're just there. They're not going to move, or if they are moving, they're not going to crawl very far. They will die. Your repellents. And then the third thing to protect against vector-borne diseases that are spread by ticks is know how to remove your tick off your body, right? No petroleum jelly, no matches, nothing like that. Even the tick removers, they're okay, but they're not ideal. What you really want to do is grab a pair of tweezers, pinch as close to your skin as you possible so that you grab their mouth parts and pull straight up. And the reason you want to do that is because if they decide to drool into you or vomit into you when you're trying to remove them because you're stressing them out, they will deposit the sugars for alpha-gal and also any nasty organisms that they're carrying. So if you can pull it out without them opening their mouth and drooling, fantastic. You have a much higher chance of preventing this syndrome and also other diseases. So I'm near the end. I was going to say, if you are diagnosed with alpha-gal syndrome, it does not mean that you will be unable to eat meat for life. There are some things that are developing. For instance, something called a gal-safe pig. Now, this pig has been engineered not to contain the sugar in its meat, and it's used specifically for organ transplant and tissue replacement therapies in human medicine. But someone also realized, hey, for those people that have lost the ability to eat meat, we could also use it to create bacon and pork chops. And so it's being marketed at that as well. So it's safe to eat this meat because it has none of this sugar. I don't know how expensive it is. I've never looked. But it has been FDA approved. It's considered the first of the kind alteration in pigs to sort of help appease a food allergy. And in order to get this idea out, the company actually advertised that you could put an order in for pigs or bacon to test out to see if it tasted the same. And what they did not expect was the huge volume of people that wanted to try this meat, which gave an indication of how systemic this allergy has pervaded the United States. The CDC states about 450,000 people are now diagnosed with alpha-gal syndrome, and they think this is well underreported because it's not a reportable condition. But you think about that, almost 500,000 people have this allergy. It's a good thing that we are starting to shed some more light on it. Now, the backside of all of this talk about an allergy to red meat spread by ticks means that there's lots of different opinions that are happening with conspiracy influencers. And I just want to say a few of these quotes. It is obviously the devilish work of the PETA or some like-minded anti-meat group that has triggered this allergy. I'm referring to the red meat allergy spread by the Lone Star tick as a malady that was discovered a few years ago and one that is rapidly spreading across America. So one thing that drives some of these ideas is that it's not a biological weapon specific to the United States. This is a global phenomenon spread by many, many different ticks. So the idea of being able to engineer all these ticks at the same time to spread the same allergy is very difficult to try and explain. Here's another alternative view that this tick scare is a green ploy to get us to stop eating meat altogether. I'm going to read this quote. It is certainly coincidental that right around the time when climate change fanatics are making much ado about nothing concerning meat consumption, that the CDC would come out with a claim just as the global warming crowd is trying to push people into eating bugs. So there's lots of factors. Mainly they're all based on fear and not understanding what's going on, but you should be aware because now I'm counting you all as informed about alpha-gal syndrome. So all of these alternative views about weaponizing ticks to spread this allergy, I think you should be able to address these concerns and say, well, maybe we should think about this in a different way. So with that, I just want to give a quick summary to highlight that alpha-gal syndrome, which I'm calling AGS here, is a unique food allergy that is against all mammalian products. It is characterized solely by a delayed reaction after you eat your meat. People can be sensitized to alpha-gal and not necessarily become allergic to red meat. So the sensitization through a tick bite or whatever is one thing. The expression of the allergy is something different. So usually what happens is you get a tick bite and then maybe a month or 3 months later you start to get reactions, but only in a small subset of people. The only way to get rid of it or to protect yourself against it is to protect yourself against the bite of a tick, and then the allergy can go away over time if you're not hypersensitized. And the reason why things are spreading so much is because the ticks are moving north. There are more ticks. Even the ticks that were here before, like the black-legged tick that spreads Lyme disease, the numbers are way higher than they used to be, simply because the winters are getting warmer and they're not dying. And so I have a few tick myths that I've been asked many questions. Maybe you have come across these before. I want to say the big one that I get asked the most is, do ticks jump at you or fall from trees? No, they do not. You pick them up when you're walking by, I would say, usually long grasses, and they grab hold of you, and then they migrate up. So they migrate up into your hairline or your armpit or wherever it might be, and it's not because it's falling from the trees. So that's the common one. And then finally, this one. Does wearing socks protect you from tick bites? That is blatant evidence that no, in fact, the socks work as a nice way for the ticks to grab onto you, and then they bite you through your socks when you have the little tiny ones, the seed ticks. So wearing socks is not enough to protect you. If you're wearing permethrin-treated socks, fantastic, they will die. And then lastly, I published this in the conversation in August. And if you have any questions or you want to see more about this disease, this page is loaded with links that give you more information, such as the kind of testing that you would need, or whether that tick is in your area, or what can you do when you go to your doctor and say, I think I might have this, or an allergist, how to arm yourself with some information. So with that, I'm going to pass this off to the next guest, which is Jalynn Murry, who's the starting PhD student in our lab, and she has a unique story to tell you.
Hello, all. I'm Jalynn Murry, and I just started at the University of Notre Dame this fall. And today I'm going to give you guys just a little bit of talk about alpha-galactose syndrome and then noticing the signs, diagnosis, and management. So first, I wanted to just kind of parrot what Lee said and give a brief overview of what we see when we see AGS. So we see that tick bite generally by star tick in this region. And then with weeks to months after that tick bite, we see the consumption of a mammalian meat, a dairy, a gelatin, or other mammal-derived product. And then finally, we see things after hours, not directly after eating. We see things like abdominal pain, diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, and then like hives, itching, and swelling, and then anaphylaxis in very severe cases. Then I wanted to tell you all a little bit about me. So I, as we said, I'm a first-year PhD student. During my undergrad years, I spent time as a volunteer cheerleading coach. I was heavily involved in my school's theater program, and I ride horses and mules. So I spend a lot of time outdoors. I'm an ecologist by trade, so doing lots of things out in the outdoors, riding trails, which leads me to some of the studies that I've done during my undergrad, which is basically anything from ecological to cancer. I spent some time catching woodpeckers and learning about their nate patches to see if they characterize fitness traits, and then doing some FDA-approved drug screening at the University of Notre Dame, which actually led me to where I am today. But why am I qualified to tell you all about AGS? Because I haven't done any previous research, and I'm just starting out, so I haven't really started my project yet. So I wanted to tell you all a little bit of a story about myself. Around 2 years ago, I was out riding my mule, and I had a bit of a tack malfunction, and I hopped off to redo some of my tack, and when I hopped back on, everything was fine. I went home, and I had something similar to this on my leg. This is actually my leg from this morning. I have scarring from bites of what a lot of people would think are chigger bites. What we found out was that those bites were actually seed ticks. And a few weeks later, I ate a taco and was just going about my day. I come from a 4-H family. I raised pigs, so very involved in the agricultural industry. And I was driving with one of my friends to the town near us, and I developed this. What started as just little red spots on my shoulder and neck. I called my mom and I was like, Mom, I think I have a stress rash. I get them a lot. I had exams coming up. We were about to midterm season. We were pretty much 2 years ago today. And I was like, I think I'm getting a stress rash. And she was at a party and she was like, it's fine, do a craft. Lower your stress levels a little bit. And I was like, okay, I can do that. And then the rash got a little bit worse. It started to move down my neck onto my hands and knees, and I got this horrible, horrible stomach ache. And I started vomiting. And she was like, I think you're having an allergic reaction. But to what? And she was like, oh, you have an allergic reaction to your brother's cologne. You hugged your brother, and now you're having an allergic reaction to his cologne. Get in the shower. So I get in the shower. Well, that didn't work. So then we saw this. This is me at the hospital that night. You can see that I have swelling of my eyelids and then also swelling around my neck. In the span of 2 or so hours, I went from a teeny tiny rash on my neck and a stomach ache to full body hives, swelling of my face, my hands, my feet. You can see in this picture here that when I closed my hands, you couldn't even see my knuckles anymore. This picture here is after my very first epinephrine shot. So I'm actually finally getting some relief. And then I had swelling for days afterwards, and nobody could figure out what was wrong with me. They were like, oh, you have a food allergy of some sort. I had eaten tacos. I had eaten peanut products that day. And I had always had kind of a trouble with like stomach troubles. We had done like testing to see if I was gluten sensitive or all of these things. And doctors kind of just chalked it up to me having anxiety. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my diagnosis pathway. I had that first anaphylactic reaction. I was referred to an allergist, and they tested me for an adult onset cilantro allergy. I was like, okay, great, I've eaten cilantro my whole life, and now you're saying I'm allergic to it? Like, why would that be? And during this time, I was told that I was not allowed to eat any sort of animal product, so I was completely vegan, and I was not allowed to eat any cilantro, obviously, or any peanut or tree nut product, for fear that I would go into another reaction. So they tested me for an adult onset cilantro allergy. Obviously, that came back negative. Then I had a secondary reaction about 10 to 14 days afterwards, where I didn't have the throat closing up that I had in the first, but I still got the hives, the swelling. And that was after the steroids that they had given me the first time had worn completely off, and it was still in my system. So then, instead of testing me for more things, this allergist was like, how long after you ate this, this, and this did you say that you had the reaction? And I was like 4 hours. And he was like, you don't have a food allergy. You don't have a food allergy. You have idiopathic anaphylactic response. You need to lower your stress levels, which is exactly what my mother had said. But by this point in time, we were very sure that what I had was a food allergy. When I went into the emergency room both times, they were like, this is super characteristic of a food allergy, get a second opinion. So I went to an allergist that was in the town around an hour away from me, rather than the town that was just close by, over in Kansas City, and she was actually AGS informed. She came into my room, she looked at me, she looked at my chart, she said, you spend a lot of time outside? And I said, I'm an ecologist that rides horses. Of course I spend a lot of time outside. And she said, okay, you have AGS, let's get it tested. Like, is there any way you could have been around ticks? And I was like, yeah, I actually just had, and I showed her my legs. And she goes, and that's how I know. And that was when I was diagnosed with AGS. So that was kind of, for most patients, a very quick turnaround time. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but I was really lucky that my second allergist was AGS informed. But this kind of gave me a segue to dive really deep into all of the scientific literature about what was going on inside my body. So in living with AGS, my story is obviously not everyone's. I had a really fast diagnosis time because I was able to have an allergist that was AGS informed. As of right now, we're seeing an average diagnosis time of around 7 years for patients, particularly those that are not having that full-blown anaphylactic response, but just those stomach troubles, because the allergy can range anywhere from hives around the lips stomach troubles to that full-blown anaphylaxis response that I see in myself. I have to be very self-advocating when I go places like restaurants or potlucks or even things like that, and I'm lucky to have a really great support system. My parents and my family and my friends are all really great about being like, hey, can you remind me what you're allergic to? Or sending me ingredients lists to make sure that there's nothing that I am allergic to. However, there's a lot of convoluted things on ingredients lists that I'll show you all a little bit later that can cause some issues when it comes to looking at ingredients lists when you have alpha-gal. This brings me to my next point, which is checking ingredient labels and watching for symptoms after eating new foods and going to new restaurants, which has been incredibly interesting moving to a new area. So every time I go to a new restaurant for like 4 or 5 hours afterwards, I'm checking my watch, I'm making sure I don't have a rash, and then I always carry my EpiPens with me, and my friends know how to use them and all of that sort of thing. Because I cannot eat a lot of the mammalian products that we get protein, iron, and B12 from, I have to make sure that I'm taking things in my diet that supplement that. I also have to make sure that when I go to the doctor, they're not giving me anything that is gel capsuled or has a mammalian product in it, because it will cause me to go into anaphylaxis. I eat a lot of chicken products, I eat a lot of fish, and then I do take supplements to kind of supplement specifically that B12 that we see that decrease in. I wanted to give a little bit of a sneaky products that can cause reactions as we get headed into the Thanksgiving season. So I included a little picture of a pie right here because, but mainly things like Advil liquid gels. You wouldn't think that this would send anybody into anaphylaxis, but it definitely can. And I actually had an issue with the vitamin C gummies. So those were causing me to have like incredible itching and hives when I was first in like my getting diagnosed period. Also things like fajita veggies, frozen fajita veggies. We see that those contain milk. That can send me into an anaphylactic reaction. And then this is the really big one that a lot of people don't understand, chicken sausage. Because it is often cased in pork casing, that intestinal lining can cause really severe reactions in alpha-gal patients. So then just a little bit of the management of the disease and like what kind of things that I do, or if you know someone that has alpha-gal, what they can do to kind of advocate for themselves. It's super misdiagnosed and misunderstood. There's a lot of physicians that don't really know what alpha-gal is, and there have been studies that have shown that patients often are the people advocating for their diagnosis on this front. And if you believe that you may have AGS, you need to advocate for testing, because there are so many doctors out there that have no clue that it exists. So if you are doing your due diligence by coming to talks like this, educating yourself and learning, self-advocation is like super important as well. This is what I had to do when I was getting diagnosed. I kept a journal of everything that I'd eaten, and then for 4 to 5 hours afterwards, I logged every hour if I had any type of response to the food that I had eaten. Obviously, we're gonna avoid mammalian-based products because they'll cause those reactions. So these are things like foods, medical products, so certain medications, and then certain vaccines and gel capsules. I do want to give like a little bit of a, not every medication or vaccine has a mammalian product. Please speak with your healthcare provider. I don't have like an exhaustive list about which vaccines do or don't carry those products. And then avoid further tick bites and treating reactions with epinephrine. So as Lee advised, when you go out, making sure that you're wearing the right type of clothing, that you're using the right insect repellent, those types of things are very, very helpful in avoiding those extra severe reactions. And then I wanted to give just a little bit of an overview of the questions that I will be asking throughout my PhD in a way that is a little bit more understandable. So I am really interested in the molecular mechanisms of AGS. This particularly means like which parts of tick saliva are responsible for the allergic reaction. Is it directly the tick saliva? Does it have something to do with microbiome? All of those types of things. And then also, do feeds influence a tick's ability to transmit AGS? So if a tick bites another organism and then they bite you, does that mean they're more or less adept to transmit that allergy? And then I'm going to do this by investigating the components of tick salival samples and using glycobiology techniques, which is the biology of sugars. So because it's a sugar allergy, you see the connection there. And then what is the cause of the allergic response rather than a fever-type sickness that we see with other types of antibodies in things like malaria or even like other tick-borne illnesses like Lyme's disease. And then ultimately, this is hopes for better characterization of the disease so that we know what's actually happening in these people's bodies. I wanted to give a little bit of resources for AGS, and if you're curious about these, I'm happy to kind of disperse them widely. There's a couple of things that are just like parents seeking information for their children, how to talk about AGS with your kids. I actually listened to this episode of This Podcast Will Kill You, episode 153 today. It is, a friend recommended it to me. He came into our lab and he was like, Jay, have you listened to this podcast? And I was like, no. And he was like, you need to. And it's really good. It has a lot of really awesome information, so it's really exciting. And then I just wanted to say thank you. And then we're happy to take questions.
Okay, because it's an allergy, even though it's maybe a later onset, does that mean you're always going to have it then?
So not necessarily. It has been shown that those IgE antibodies do decline over time in certain patients. My allergist is pretty certain because of the severity of my allergy that I will either have it for a very long time or I will always have it. And I would say that even if my levels go down, I've kind of adapted to a way of life where like I would be a little bit nervous to try a meat product again that contained that alpha-gal.
So we know that this allergy is like transmitted through Lone Star ticks. Have we looked into whether it's transmitted in different kinds of ticks? You might have covered this, Leah.
Yeah, so the question is it only the Lone Star tick or other ticks that spread the syndrome? And they don't know. I mean, there's some evidence that chiggers might be able to. There are some cases where someone was envenomated by a snake bite, and there are these alpha-gal sugars on snake venom. It's a little bit different, but that's being investigated. And then what has shown to be an interesting observation is that people with AGS are also super sensitive to bee stings. And so it's thought that maybe the sting of a wasp or a bee will also contain alpha-gal, and then that can explain a little bit about how you end up getting super sensitized, because you can be for many years just getting an odd bee sting once in a while, and then it's like, I don't know, something happens and you become super allergic to a bee sting. So it's kind of similar to the tick bites and your immune system reaction. But really, it's just an immune system gone wonky. Yeah. But yes, there are different sources, possibly.
Early on, you mentioned pets too. So what kind of reactions do they have in those flea and tick prevention chewables that they get? Is that any effect for them?
Okay, so the question is, how do pets possibly react to ticks and all of the products that you give to them to protect them against ticks? So there are there is many cases of cats being allergic to flea bites, and animals can also be allergic to ticks, the saliva, like Jay mentioned. It's not necessarily alpha-gal driven. I don't know if there's any veterinary studies looking into that. But certainly there are allergies that they think originate with an insect bite, and then that turns into a food allergy. So you can quite often, surprisingly, have cats that are allergic to eating chicken. Now that would not be an alpha-gal allergy, because all poultry is safe. There is no alpha-gal in poultry. But it could be something along those lines. Having an allergy to red meat is not unusual. You can have an allergy as a human to cat dander and pork. It's called a pork-cat allergy. So there are many types of allergies like this beyond the scope of alpha-gal.
Thank you. This talk is fascinating. I really appreciate the personal experience with the syndrome. I did notice you had a list of misconceptions about ticks, and one of them had to do with when the ticks are biting, like summer versus fall. So let's say someone is going camping this coming weekend with their son.
Someone.
In a tent, what's the risk of actually having it this time of year or getting bit by this tick or other ticks this time of year?
So the question is, what is the risk of getting bitten by a tick in October when traveling to Michigan for a camping trip? That might be the most specific question I've ever been asked. Your risk of getting a disease from a tick bite is very high, because they've had a long time over the year to be feeding and collecting exposures to possible bacteria and or viruses. And the bacteria or viruses have had long enough to grow inside of the tick body to make it into the salivary glands so that when you get that bite, you can be infected. As for your risk to alpha-gal syndrome, a lot of it hasn't really been well investigated because it's such a new syndrome, but the likelihood of getting it skyrockets if you get those tiny little tick bites, the seed ticks, because they have to do a lot of injury to your skin in order to get those tiny little mouth parts to get through into your skin to feed. So they do a lot of damage. Plus you're getting a lot of them on you, so your inoculation, so to speak, is very high. This time of the year, the seed ticks are less. They all hatch in August. August is your most deadliest time for these baby ticks here in Indiana or possibly Michigan. So they're a little bit bigger now, they're easier to see. So I actually think your risk would go down because you can detect them. You can pull them off in time. So if you can pull them off before they start feeding on you, that is the key. And before they start transmitting anything to you, which can be catch them, like say within 24 hours of them being on your body, you should be fine. That goes for Lyme disease as well. If you can get them before they feed off of you or start getting blood in their system, fantastic.
I will say that I did get my allergy in October. So, but it was in
You're
Kansas.
not safe.
It was in Kansas, so that could be, and it was seed ticks. So,
don't roll in the grass. Something I will say as a tip is if you are hiking outdoors and you're going through trails, try not to brush the vegetation on the sides. Stay in the middle path. And don't roll in the grass. And if you're really curious, you can act like an entomologist. So when you go out and take a white T-shirt and loop it over your walking stick or your cane or whatever you want to use, and just drag it beside you as you're going and take a look. And if you notice that there's some ticks, don't be surprised they're also on you. Okay. Any other questions?
More tick bites, which beyond the just don't get tick bites, could it exacerbate your already compromised?
yes, it definitely could. So as I said, when I showed that very first picture of those little bites, I actually got those bites while I was working this summer out at a summer camp, and I would be really interested to know if it has made me more sensitive. Obviously, I haven't tried to find out, but I definitely wouldn't be surprised. It has been shown that over time, if you get more bites, not only can it exacerbate, but what they think actually happened to me was that I got it when I was very young, and that's why I was having all of the stomach troubles. And then I got bit by all of those ticks, which led to my anaphylactic reaction.
When they test for it, can they test for the severity? Is it just a positive or negative?
So yes and no. When they test, they do an IgE antibody count. And the normal person for IgE antibodies for alpha-gal has less than 0.1. It's like grams per microliter or something. But my numbers were in the 7s when I first got my diagnosis.
But to be clear, you can have a very high IgE response and some alpha-gal triggering, but you don't have an AGS. It's a big mystery. Yeah, still.
That's why you need research.
There's lots of research. Keela first, and then you.
I was just wondering, like, is there some trend in populations? Like you said, 400,000 people have it. Do you have any particular trends? And tied to that, what was alpha-gal like 500 years ago with Native Americans? How traditional populations deal with this?
You have 2 questions. Okay, so the first question is, are there any trends that you see across the 450,000 that have been documented now? No. And the reason why I say that, other than where the Lone Star tick populates and lives, is that it's non-reportable. So there's no big data collection center to take all this patient information and pull it together. The best thing you can do is go on that alphagalinformation.org site, and they network everybody and provide information on your risk levels or whatever it might be. An interesting aside is that this skyrocketed during COVID. Any ideas why? More people were spending time outside, correct. And so your risk of Lyme disease and all the other Lyme diseases, there's a really nasty one called babesiosis that you can get, which is like the malaria of the tick world. It also was increased, and it's because we all got used to being outside and healthier. And we got healthier, but we didn't realize we could have hitchhikers on us that could damage us. What was your second question?
So, like, tied to the population trends or whatever, how do you have evidence or any anecdotal stories about 500 years ago for Native Americans? How did they deal with this? Because they would have had ticks in America since forever, right? So.
There are researchers looking into that now. There's evidence that alpha-gal syndrome existed in the 1980s, but unfortunately, the patients weren't believed. So even the quote that I read to you, the allergists thought people were crazy, and it was underreported, and you needed to get a large group of people. And I think once you get alpha-gal syndrome, say you got it in 1980 and you didn't know what it was, you just knew that you shouldn't be eating meat, are you going to report that? No. So we needed to hit a maximum capacity and to solve the mystery to start with. I think it was 2009,
yes.
Correct me?
Yeah.
2009,
in
it wasn't that very long ago, for that to be even recognized. And now I think it's 42% of all medical trained staff even know about alpha-gal syndrome. That's 42% isn't enough. So the more that we tell this story, like Jalynn said, the more knowledge is about it, I think the more the discovery will be made to pull in that kind of data to maybe look back and say, hey, did this person have this disease? Maybe they did. Not disease. I keep saying disease. It's not a disease. this allergy or not. But here's a fun fact. John Grisham, you familiar with the name John Grisham, the author? He had alpha-gal syndrome. He was one of the first ones to shine a spotlight on it. And now he can eat red meat again. So he's a good success story as well.
Hoping for that.
So I hear the campsite opens up in Michigan this weekend. I'm going to take it. I get back from camping, a day goes by, I'm in the shower saying, ow, I think that's a tick. What do I do? So I try to take it out. Maybe I sustain it. Maybe I destroy it. Do I go to med point? Do I show it to a doctor? I don't know. I don't know if it's a little one, I don't know if it's got a white spot in the back, I don't know if it's got Lyme disease or bulbionosis. Like, what do I do
Yeah.
once I get back and I see that there's a tick embedded in my thigh?
So I would say don't do what I do the first time I had a tick here. It was like I was riding my motorbike and a bumblebee got into my helmet. Imagine that scene. Yeah? That's how I was with my first tick. No motorbike, no helmet, nothing. I was like panicked because I did not want it on me. That's not the appropriate response. So what you want to do, if you can see it and reach it with your hands, you want to pull it straight out with the tweezers, like I said, and put it into a baggie, a Ziploc baggie, and toss it into your freezer. There is no testing for ticks necessarily in Indiana. The St. Joe County now no longer has a tick surveillance program. It was stopped this summer, so that's unfortunate because it's good to know what's circulating in an area, but that's no longer the case. So what you want to do then is disinfect that site that you pulled off and wait, unfortunately, and really monitor it. If it's itchy, that's a good sign that you've been sensitized to the saliva. If you got it off within the 24 hours, I wouldn't be worried necessarily about Lyme disease, but still look and see if you're going to get a rash around that area. Lyme disease here is so prevalent in St. Joe County that if you go into your clinician with your tick in your bag and say, look at this, and it's a black-legged tick, it's very easy to see, you're probably not a Lone Star, they will immediately prescribe you doxycycline. You don't even have to get your blood tested or anything like that. So that tells you that it's really prevalent. So my advice to you is pull the tick straight out as quickly as you find it, put it into a baggie, and if not, you can send it to me if you don't want it anymore, because I collect ticks now. And then really watch that wound site. And if it does get itchy, I would say that's the first sign that you might be becoming sensitized in the future to red meat products. Yep.
So is it known? So you know it's the saliva of the tick, but do you know is it microbial? But it's definitely not a parasite within the tick that's triggering the allergy.
So what literature has said is that it's not known. It's really interesting because you look at like all of these different things, and there are a lot of people that say that it is a certain epitope of the sugar that's present in the tick saliva, but we can't be truly sure because of just the scope of the research that's been done right now. But as of right now, it is believed to be the fact that either it is just the tick saliva or the tick saliva interacting with something else, so either a blood meal or not necessarily a virus, but a bacteria.
I'll just add one thing to that, and you can all be like citizen scientists here with this question. Because alpha-gal syndrome doesn't happen every time you get a tick bite, or ever at all, even if you've got lots of tick bites, the thought is, how is it that's causing that sensitization? So it could be that people that have alpha-gal syndrome got not only the saliva, but when you pulled the tick out, it regurgitated some of its previous meal, say on a deer, and then you're going to get exposed to deer alpha-gal. Or it could be microbiota that you cause it to regurgitate. So it could be a combination of all of those things. It could be just a really fat tick, which gave you a huge dose of saliva. It could be all of those seed ticks doing lots of damage to your skin, and the microflora on your skin now goes in. And now you're reacting to your skin microflora, plus the saliva, plus the damage. Because it's really a big mystery. Like you said, we don't know yet. We haven't been researching it long enough. Yeah. You had a question, sir?
Me?
Yeah?
Yeah, why is it called the Lone Star tick? Is it because it's from Texas? Or
No, that's what I thought. But no, because of the single lone white spot on the female's back. They don't care about the male tick, apparently.
No,
there's
just the
no
female.
spot on it. But yeah, it's not that. Here's a fun fact. Even though Texas is in the south, and it's right in that belt of Lone Star tick regions, when they started to look at these patients that were responding to this chemotherapy, they noticed that there weren't any people in Texas that were reacting. Like, how is this possible? And it's because the Lone Star tick population in Texas is surprisingly low Do you know why it's low? It shouldn't be low. Any guesses?
Fire ants.
Yes! You are good! Most people don't think that. It's the fire ants. You like the fire ants. We need fire ants here. We need to import some fire ants. They love eating ticks. People don't like fire ants, I know. But they do protect you from tick-borne diseases and things like alpha-gal syndrome. So there's something good now to say about fire ants. Any other questions? Oh, good. I think we're over time, aren't we? Yeah.
Thank our speakers. And so our next Universe Revealed talk will be on November 4th, 6:30 p.m. here, Tuesday. It's going to be on the Nobel Prizes. So this week, the Nobel Prizes are being announced. We're working on getting the panel together now. And so that'll be coming up in November. And then in December, we have Jonathan Krass, who will be coming to talk about instrumentation that he's been developing to study exoplanets, planets outside of our solar system. So anyway, those are all coming up. Thank you so much for coming out tonight, and we'll see you soon.